Hello? Alright, I'm recording. I'm re-recording. I just recorded a long lecture about the nature of internal and external martial arts. Just to find out, my mic had been muted the whole time. You always do. You always do a test video. Always do a test video. So, I think this is an opportunity for me to do it better. More clear, more concise. So I was thinking, I was watching one of those videos, inspirational compilations, whatever, of people doing martial art drills and self-defense drills, and I was like, this stuff is really easy to criticize, especially if you don't know anything about martial arts or conflict and connection. And so I thought I'd make a video explaining it so that people who don't know better can know better. So, martial arts is defined, I think, originally it's martial, war, art, the expression of the virtue of something, right? So, martial art is the expression of the virtue of war. So, I think war is a bit rough because it's got a lot of connotations. So I think it's better to be defined as conflict and connection. And whether that's between people, between groups of people, between nations, right? The expression of the virtue of conflict and connection is what martial arts is. And I believe it's universal. Martial arts is a universal school of thought. It is about the strength or the virtue of conflict and connection, and conflict and connection is a universal idea, a universal, I would say, principle, but it's a little bit ambiguous, so I'm going to go into detail to what conflict and connection is. It doesn't matter whether you're a scientist, like a chemist or an astrophysicist or a geologist or biologist, microbiologist, right? Or whether you're a spiritual leader, like a Taoist monk or a Buddhist sage or whatever, right? There's a fundamental understanding of how things are, that is connected through conflict and connection. That all things arise through the process of conflict and connection, whether at a quantum particle level or an atomic level or a cellular level or a social level, or an abstract spiritual level, right? Everything happens because of the interaction of two other things, two or more, right? And this is conflict and connection. And connection is things connecting, right? Whether they're two particles or two people, right? And conflict is a kind of struggle or effort that happens between them. And this effort can be creative or it can be destructive. And so, in martial arts, we're understanding how people fight, how they connect, how they have conflict to create, whether it be creative or whether it be destructive, and we're studying how to navigate that, hopefully to be more creative rather than destructive, because that is what the virtue of conflict and connection is creation. Because to destroy is not virtuous. It's conducive to weakness. So, the strengths of conflict and connection, what creates more strength is creation. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the spirit world and internal martial arts versus external martial arts. So, now that we understand that martial arts is about learning how to create through conflict, right? And how to do it more efficiently, more optimally. You know, hopefully people don't die. Hopefully people don't get extremely injured. Hopefully we learn how to navigate physical violence in a way that is creative and helpful. But the thing about martial arts is it's more than just physical violence. It's also about how we conflict within ourselves, and how we conflict with in ways that aren't entirely physical, whether they be social, and under a different social hierarchy. It doesn't have to be physical dominance. It can be entirely pathological. It could be about whether or not you get your M&Ms at the end of dinner. You know, like it could be something entirely capable of being resolved through a conflict that isn't physical, right, or violent physically. So spirituality. When people think about internal martial arts, they think of spirituality. They think of spiritual stuff. But when people think of spiritual stuff, they think of magic and made up things. And so what is spirituality, right? If there is some substance to the idea of spirituality, what is it, right? If it's not made up stuff, tricks and nonsense, right? Well, spirit means motion. So spirituality is understanding the world through how things connect and how things move. And things are always moving. Things are always changing, right? Things are always connecting and conflicting, you know, at an atomic level especially. And even more broadly on a you know, interpersonal level and communal level and between groups and abstract ideas, right? It's like this organization of entities is doing this one thing, and then this other organization of entities is doing another thing, and they're affecting each other, you know, and they're affecting their environment, and it's like it's all very abstract and complicated, you know. It's like, okay, Exxon spilled a bunch of oil. What is that going to do to the environment? How are other people going to react to that? You know, how are they going to resolve that problem? You know, this is an example of a spiritual problem, because spirituality is how we try to understand the way things connect and change, right? And things are always changing, and things are always in motion. And you have to keep up. You can't get stuck on small details like the atomic structure of this, you know, molecule, right? Because if you do, things are already going to have changed a lot more. And so there's a time and a place for microscopic thinking and analysis and conflict resolution. In which case it's like, okay, there's this new strain of virus. We have to go to the lab and think in small details about the structure of reality. You know, it's like, okay, let's take a look at these small building blocks and see how we can work with them to create a cure for this virus, right? But when it comes to things that aren't like that aren't of that nature, like people fighting, right? It's like, how do you stop people from fighting? Well, it doesn't matter the atomic structure of their brains. Doesn't matter what chemicals they got going on in there. Because if you want to fundamentally change them at their core of who they are, so that they stop fighting without putting band-aids on it, you have to understand how they work as people in a way that is abstract, in a way that transcends small details, in a way that is macroscopic, with understanding that permeates human nature itself, not the nature of our material structure, but the greater nature of, you know, you as a person, right? Like, that's abstract. It's very abstract. What is a person, right? Like, oh, it's a bunch of molecules bound by energy, you know? It's like, okay, does that help? No, right? So we have to learn to navigate the world microscopically and macroscopically. And so spirituality is about navigating the world macroscopically with a larger view of how things work generally, you know? And so there are these kind of background patterns and principles, or I guess patterns that reoccur that point us to certain principles about how the way things are, you know? And I forgot what I was talking about. That's a pattern for you. The importance of internal arts. So, spirituality is important, and it's not voodoo, it's not magic, it's understanding how things move and connect and change broadly, you know, on a level that is happening too fast for us to sit down in a lab and examine something, right? So, if religions aren't teaching you how to handle things that change quickly, then it's not serving you. That's something to think about, by the way, if you're a religious person. If you're having trouble resolving conflict using the teachings that you're being taught in your school of thought, then you need to rethink your school of thought. The physical world and the spiritual world are the same thing. If you're Taoist, or if you're a Latter-day Saint, then you will understand what that means if you've studied deeply into your doctrine. So, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they believe that that everything is matter. Everything is physical, right? And that if there's a spirit world, it's not. And when I say spirit world, I of course am referring to how most people think that there's other dimensions that are material, but like in a different way than this one, right? You know, like there's the whole multiverse theory and stuff. It's all rather silly, but you know, people have their imaginations and it's fun. So, you know, that some people might say that there's another world, like past the veil, right? But what is the veil? Well, I'd say the veil is human understanding. I don't think it's that there's another dimension. And if you're a Latter-day Saint, you understand that as well, because all things are matter, you know, Doctrine and Covenants. It's really interesting. Those two scriptures. I don't remember which section, but and if you're Taoist, you'll understand that as well. It's like the spirit world is the physical world. It's just there's a differentiation between the two in our minds because we perceive them differently. There's different ways of perceiving the physical world, and they affect entirely how we interact with it. And so, one way of perceiving it is that there's objects. You look, you see objects, you interact with objects, right? But another way of seeing it is that those objects are alive and they're doing their own thing. And you can choose to enter into their organic processes and try to fit in or not, right? And if you mess up their organic processes, there will be problems. And now both of these views of the world are a little bit correct. I'd say one more correct than the other, but the other one has a little bit of relevance. And I'd say that the world is organic and it's alive on its own. And things are happening regardless of us, you know, in our conscious interaction with them. And they do have organic processes, natural processes that occur that follow their own intelligent design, you know. Matter knows what to do on its own, and it does what it does to create all these marvelous and complicated patterns. And so we can view them as objects, and that is helpful to a degree to simplify the process of understanding the different working parts of this organic, set of patterns and things and happenings and shapes, forms, right? It's like, okay, I can classify this complex machinery right in front of me as a microphone. This is a microphone. That's a camera. That's my screen, right? And I have to do that because it simplifies the process. I don't have to break it down into very abstract, not pseudo-abstract, quasi-abstract, spiritual lingo. It's like, okay, this is, and I guess essentially this is spiritual lingo when I call it a microphone. It's like, that's spiritual. I'm navigating, communicating how my computer is existing, and its different parts are existing. It's like, fundamentally, it helps to know that this is a microphone and that's a camera, regardless of whether that is a quantum description of them, right? I could go down to the atomic level. Well, this is a complex carbon, whatever. Like, I could make all sorts of levels of analysis on what this is, but it's useful to say computer and screen and camera and microphone, because there is a part of our brain that relies on that simplicity to problem solve. So there's yeah, so that's spiritual. That's what spirituality means, is simplifying things. Or not, that's not what it means, but that is what they do in spiritual living, is they simplify things. And they use language to describe the nature of things that may not entirely, it may not be articulate to the degree that an astrophysicist might be comfortable with, but it is articulate enough that if you allow yourself a level of creative interpretation, which sounds dangerous, I know, but that's why we are creative. That's why we have brains, okay? So we can infer and interpret and understand the way things connect and conflict with each other, and how things move and change throughout time. And so it's very important to use or to exist within, like, it's important to build your foundation of living on the organic side of life, but it's also important to incorporate and understand and incorporate the concrete and detail-driven side of life. Because if you exist in one or the other, in the organic side, life is chaotic, everything's changing, and if you're constantly aware of all that change, it will overwhelm you. But if you exist entirely in the concrete side, you won't actually be able to affect any real change when life happens, right? You won't be able to navigate real life, right? It's like, okay, you get in a car crash. Did you prepare for that car crash? No? Well, oh well, right? So you have to balance it out, right? You have to bring order to chaos, but don't just try to exist in order by itself, because if you pretend like there's no chaos, then you're going to have a hard time when that organic process, which does undeniably exist on its own, hits your doorstep, regardless of whether you're ready for it. So, the spirit world and the physical world are the same thing, and we understand them differently, and we have to understand them differently in our mind because of how we perceive them and how our brain processes those different kinds of information, abstract information versus concrete information, and how they're both important. So, internal and external martial arts are the same thing, but one is more subtle and one is more apparent. In internal martial arts, you're learning how to breathe, how far down to push your lungs into your diaphragm, which muscles to tense and to relax, and to what degree you should relax them to. And all that is very fine motor movement, very subtle changes that you could be standing perfectly still and be in a completely different, have completely different substance to your position, one way or another, right? It is possible to stand like this and be easy to knock over backwards, and it's also possible to stand like that and be entirely capable of receiving momentum and not being knocked over backwards. And that depends entirely on your internal structure. And it's not mystical bullcrap. It's not magic. It's just an internal connection between your brain, your conscious self, and your body, which has marvelous capabilities, and can do many different things that we often don't make use of. Namely, it's like if you've ever had a panic attack and you breathed very carefully and it went away. It's like, how did you resolve that? You just breathed, right? In a specific way. It's like, oh, you affected real change internally by breathing. And so internal arts is about how to affect internal change, or how to affect change internally. It's subtle, and it usually isn't noticeable by someone else unless they're Sherlock Holmes and they can detect how hard you're pressing yourself into the ground by the air pressure or something. But most people aren't Sherlock Holmes, and so internal arts are an important part of martial arts because they hide what you're doing. It's like there's a difference between punching someone and like punching someone, and boxers know this really well, because they know that there's many different ways of hitting something. Some of them are more sneaky than others because they practice internal arts that are oriented around boxing. And it's like, okay, you saw someone punch someone and they instantly got knocked out, and it's like, how did they do that? It didn't look like they hit them that hard, It's like they did. And they were using internal arts. They were using fine motor control internally to apply the maximum amount of momentum to that punch, by releasing tension in the right ways in their body. And so this is of course external because they're both physical, so they're the same thing. But we have to make a differentiation because we perceive motion externally, but there can be motion internally that can happen without you being able to perceive it. And so the internal arts are necessary to make martial arts work. And when I was watching that video, there was a scene where someone was doing knife defense, and that's very, very easy to criticize because knife defense is one of the most touchy subjects in martial arts, I'd say. Maybe next to gun defense. And people don't like to entertain the idea that you can be very skilled and because you trained a lot and in the right way, in a way that they don't understand, and be able to handle something like a knife attack or a gun attack, because that makes them feel insufficient. That makes them become more aware that there's stuff out there that they can handle if they got their stuff together and did what they needed to do. And so especially people in the martial arts world of sport combat, it's very, especially amongst the fandom of it, like people that watch martial arts sports, like MMA or UFC, or something like that. It's like, if it doesn't work in the ring, it doesn't work, and knife defense and all that stuff's just gonna get you killed, But the reality is that there's a fundamental difference between a fight in the ring and a fight for your life. The psychological dynamic is entirely different, because firstly, you've agreed to fight the person, so there's a conscious recognition that, okay, I'm going to enter a ring with this person, and they're going to follow rules, the same rules that I'm following. So neither of us is going to die or be severely injured. So already your nervous system is relaxed, compared to what it would be under, or the kind of stress it would be under if someone was attacking you with a knife. And so there is a big difference, and although it's a good measure of the virtue of someone, of the strength of someone, to enter a ring and face another person in a duel, it's still just a game that you play, and it doesn't entirely measure the merit of ideas that might exist and expand beyond the realm of that game. And so martial arts systems are sets of ideas and methodologies that you can practice to train your nervous system to handle stress in many different diverse ways. And the reason why I say stress is because stress is the sensation and input that you get when, the pressure that you get when you receive something. You have to face something that you haven't faced before, or that might be difficult to face and overcome. And someone stabbing you with a knife is difficult and stressful. And your body's going to dump a bunch of adrenaline into your system, and all those forms that you practiced at your McDojo aren't going to do you any good, because they go out the window, because the nervous system, part of your nervous system that handles that kind of stress, takes over, and it doesn't know what it's doing. You may think you knew, but it didn't process and digest all that stuff to the degree that it needed to actually be able to do it. And so real martial arts exist in traditional methodologies with a lot of conditioning, a lot of nervous system conditioning, a lot of meditation, a lot of qigong, a lot of internal mindfulness of sensation and how your body's moving this way or that way, where your pressure is, where your stress is, where you're releasing the tension, right? All that stuff, how you breathe, how you focus, all that stuff is internal. And you have to do it. You cannot skip it, because if you do, your nervous system won't be prepared to handle stress like that. And so, it's true, knife defense is easy to criticize, and most knife defense courses are not good. They don't prepare you as well as they should. A lot of martial arts schools are like that in general. A lot of it is very economy based, right? And it's entirely up to the individual as to what they are understanding and actually being able to apply what they're learning. And so when you take martial arts, it's important to pay attention. Does your teacher teach internal arts? They may not call it that, but if they do meditation and qigong or things like it, like yoga, then yeah, that's a good place to start, a good place to go. Because all that's very important, because you have to master that side of you. There's a monster that lives in a cave inside your head, okay? And when you're hit with the kind of stress that could kill you if you don't respond to it appropriately, that monster comes out. The monster's pretty stupid. I mean, it's marvelous. It's very, it has tens of thousands of years of human evolution behind it, but it may not always know how to respond, because its responses have been drilled in over tens of thousands of years, and they're very hard to forget. And so there's a lot of good stuff in there, like it might raise its hands up like that and cover your head, and it might chase the arms, which can be good, but it usually is not in most circumstances. Like, it has good merit. There's merit to why it does what it does instinctively, but you must learn to integrate yourself with that part of you and teach it how to behave properly, which it can do. It can learn. You just have to be willing to teach it. And once you teach it and you condition it, it's on your team, and it's not a stupid monster anymore. It turns kind of into you, and you become it. And when you get attacked, your body may dump a bunch of adrenaline into its system, but you're more likely, if you've conditioned yourself properly, you'll be able to navigate that kind of stress more appropriately. So imagine that in a fight, there's a ball of energy. And a ball is used to describe the unlimited potential of what could happen. The endless possibilities, right? It's not a real ball. It's just a geometric sphere, symbolically, to describe anything that could happen. So there's a ball of energy in between two opponents, and they have to resolve their conflict and connection that they're having. And so one of them might hold the ball, the other one might try to take it from him. What that means is that whoever's holding the ball is more in control. And if you're trying to take the ball, you're not in control. Generally, who was holding the ball is going to remain in control. But there's a lot of different factors. If someone has emotional leverage over you, they might be holding the ball. But if you are more capable physically than them, and you let the emotional leverage go, all of a sudden you have the ball. Because their leverage disappears. And you don't let that leverage affect you. That's an internal thing that you can do. And so that ball, is like, if you hold the ball, that means you understand how the human body moves. If we're talking about just the physical side of things, and when I say physical, I mean like physical violence, like fighting physically, right? If you understand how people move physically, and you're in a fight with someone with a knife, and you're in charge of yourself to the point that you can not respond irrationally or irresponsibly or dangerously to their attacks, then if you understand how they're moving, if you understand their movement, you just embody what you need to embody physically to overcome it. And so a lot of the times you'll see in knife defense videos that really test the survivability of knife attacks, where people will be running back and they'll be trying to stop the person's hands from coming in at the arms. And the person will be like swinging wildly, and they'll be coming in from both sides, and they'll be swinging and trying to stab at different angles, and it more often than not the person gets stabbed. Not really, but they would have been if it was a real knife. And the reason for that is because they're all tense, and they clearly don't understand the other person's movement. They're barely keeping up. They're keeping up just enough with their autonomic nervous system? I don't know. The part of them that reacts instinctually. They're barely keeping up to the point where they can at least try to go for their hands. But if they were more in charge of themselves, they would stop worrying about their hands. And then they would enter into that person's structure with superior structure. And that's difficult. And it requires years of nervous system conditioning and training to be able to do something like that. But it's not impossible. It's unreasonable to expect everyone to undergo that kind of training, which is why self-defense classes are often silly, because it's usually a 2-week course or something that you do, and you learn a few tricks. And if you're an integrated person with what I would call a high fight IQ, then you already understand the ball. You already understand people's structure on an intuitive level. But if you're not, you have to train. And if you're an integrated person, you'll know. But if you're not, you'll think you'll know. And that's where it's dangerous. Because you might think you have the tools you need to solve the problem, to navigate the violence, to resolve the conflict. But you don't. Or you're not able to execute them appropriately because you're not using the parts of you that you need to use internally. I think that's all. I think I said all that I need to say. It's late. I had to record this twice, and I think I left some things out. And I am winging it. Quite literally, my notes are right there on the screen. You can see them. Well, I think that's all. I covered the importance of internal arts, integrating yourself, mastering your, disciplining your nervous system, you know, how that can be understood spiritually, what spirituality is, how martial arts is an all-inclusive or an all-encompassing school of thought that can teach us about the patterns of how things conflict and connect. How internal and external arts are the same thing. And how spirituality, or not spirituality, but the spirit world and the physical world are the same thing. But the need to differentiate between two halves of the same whole, and why that is. Yeah.